Hey, what's up everyone? Ben at ProFixerr. Today we're going to be talking about how to transfer the home button over from one iPad screen to the next. This will come in handy when doing an iPad repair, and this is probably the hardest thing I've seen for people. A lot of times you try to put the home button on and it feels kind of sunken in, or it's misaligned, or just doesn't click right. But I'm going to show you my tricks on how you can transfer the home button not only safely, but make it feel like an OEM button that was installed from the factory. Everything on my workbench you'll find in the description below, so feel free to check that out. As well, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. But without further ado, let's get started on this iPad home button. One of my favorite tools that I use when doing any kind of repair that has any type of adhesive is my blue heat mat. I picked this one up a couple years ago and has been working excellent since. We actually set it to 60 degrees, which seems like the key temperature to remove adhesive pieces inside of a device. It works really, really great. What I've actually done is I've taken the old screen off of the iPad, which is actually an iPad 7. So remove the old screen, but the home button is still connected. You do need to be careful when dealing with the home button. If these are ripped, sometimes depending on where the tear is, they cannot be fixed. You'll have to use a replacement, which would lose the Touch ID function. We've been very careful as we pulled this off to ensure that there's no tears, no undue stress, or anything of the sort on this particular home button, despite all of the cracks. So you do need to be very careful. But what we want to do here is I've actually added on my heat mat to warm up the screen, kind of soften up the adhesive, and we're going to remove it and put it onto this new screen. So the first thing with that is you can take it right off your heat mat, and the tool that I use is actually my flat-edged razor. It's very, very thin, but also sharp, so it slips under the bracket without causing any bends, and as well, it slides in easily versus a dual fatter tool would actually not slide in as easily, and you could actually break the bracket or bend it in some sort of way which will make it not click as well, and that's part of my trick in order making sure that this button is going to click just as well on the new screen. So what we'll do is go ahead and take your razor and slip it under the edge. So what you want to do with this is be very careful, kind of dig down a little bit until you feel the glass, and then just kind of walk it in underneath the bracket. This can sometimes be a little bit difficult depending on if there are a bunch of cracks, but after a second you should be able to get it up just fine. Once you've inserted it just a tiny bit into the corner, we want to help aid the release of the adhesive with a little bit of alcohol or a little bit of acetone. So put a slight drop inside of there, and this will soak into the adhesive and make it a little bit easier to come off. And I'm keeping the razor blade as flat as I can to the glass. And as you can see, it's now very loose, and it's completely come off of the glass itself, and that's thanks to the acetone. You want to make sure that you keep your bracket completely flat. Any kind of bends in it will make the home button not feel as good on the new screen, so definitely be careful there. The next part of it will be to remove and peel up this whole flex cable here. This is a little bit more difficult, but with a little bit of patience you'll be able to pull it up. If you're new to this, and actually if you need it, go ahead and work on top of the heat mat. That will definitely help you. So what we'll do is I do have this part peeled up, and once we get to a little bit farther section on here, regardless of what iPad you're working with, if it has a long flex, they're all built just about the same. It's going to have a row of soldered contacts, and we do want to release this from the screen itself, so I'm going to put a small drop of acetone in there, which aids in the release of the adhesive. I'm not using any kind of razor blade on this particular part because I don't want to cause any cuts or anything like that in the razor blade itself. You can, however, use an iFixit tool, which works pretty nice, to slightly slip under the edge and to aid in lifting this off of this screen. You may notice that there is a foam, you may notice that there is a little bit of foam going around the edge of the screen. Go ahead and kind of peel that off if you need to. Make it a little bit easier to work up on the glass itself. And we're going to continue to work down. I'm going to put another little drop of acetone in there. I want to make sure this is released pretty well from the glass. And remember, there is no race when pulling this off. The safer that you can be, if you're going to take an extra 5 minutes doing this, that's totally fine, because the 5 minutes spent will make sure that you don't tear this flex cable and cause any irreversible damage. So I want to work very carefully up around the edge. And I'm actually going to remove this part from the bracket itself. It does have like a little bit of a little edge that comes down where there's that foam, and we want to pull that up, and that way this is completely loose. That will allow us to fold back this ribbon cable to ensure that we don't touch it with the razor blade, because we're going to use that again on this particular side. So once again, go and get your razor blade, and just like on the other side, keep it as flat as you can. Kind of work it up under the edge. Use a little bit of sawing motion. You want to make sure that you're not pushing too hard, because if it would slip or cut through, you'd actually cut through your home button. But just like last time, we're going to insert it just in the corner, and then use a little bit of acetone, drop down the edge, and that will completely remove the tack from the adhesive and make the bracket come off even easier. And now this bracket itself is going to be completely loose and separate from the home button. And that's exactly what we want, because it's going to make it a little bit easier to position this once we get it onto the new screen. You'll notice that your home button should be completely straight. So make sure that your home button bracket is still straight, and we'll need to remove that adhesive, which we'll do in just a second. As far as removing the home button from the actual screen, there is a ring that sits on the glass that touches the gasket that helps to give that little bit of a spring to the home button and helps to return it up to the edge of the glass. What we can do, we can kind of slip under the edge of that, which will allow that to come up with the gasket and the whole home button. And now we don't want to pull up on any of the flex cable. We just want to pull up on the edge of the home button itself. And lift it from the device. You may notice that there is going to be a very thin, clear ring of adhesive. If you can maintain that without rolling it up or without twisting it in any way, if you can push that right back down, that will actually be key, because it will help it sit better on the new screen. So now at this point, be careful. It could still be adhered to your glass in some sort of way, because this whole flex cable does have some adhesive running down the whole edge. But now we have the home button with the Touch ID completely safe. I want to place this off to the side, because we're going to essentially discard this screen, and we're going to start working on the new one. So once we put the Touch ID in a very safe spot, we do want to prepare this bracket. One of the ways that you can do that is to take a sharp razor blade. So if it's a fresh one that you've used, we want to slice off this adhesive. That always works best than trying to do any kind of scraping or anything like that. You want to get under the adhesive so it actually scrapes it off. You may scrape off a little bit of paint during this time as well, which is totally okay. That's going to help it adhere even better, as long as you don't have any of the old residue. So we're going to just cut down the edge right here, and we have cut off the adhesive. And I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but if you look, it has very little residue, but we're going to clean that off with a little bit of acetone. And now go ahead and cut off the other side as well. And that looks pretty good too. Essentially, you just want to make sure that you can slice it off, and it may leave a little bit of residue, but that's all right. Now go ahead and leave your bracket on your bench, and make sure that it's still pretty straight, which it is. We haven't bent it at all. And then you want to put a little drop of acetone on each side, and that's going to help eat away the adhesive, making it prepared to receive our primer as well as our standard adhesive to secure to the new screen. I'm going to go ahead and take a Q-tip and soak it with a little bit of acetone. Acetone can eat through a lot of stuff, so definitely be careful. Only let it touch what you know it is safe to touch, and in this situation, it's safe for it to touch the bracket. I wouldn't get it on your screen or anything like that. All right, good deal. So now this bracket is completely clean. I'm going to take a little bit of 94 primer, which I have linked up in the description below. This stuff is amazing. Basically, it's an adhesion promoter. It's going to prepare the surface and make adhesive stick even stronger. And that's one of the things that I've seen with a lot of these repairs is that the home button seems to fall off later. This will be one of the key things to ensuring that your home button doesn't fall off. Put a pretty good amount on your Q-tip because you do want it to have a little bit of a glisten to it as you put it onto your bracket. And there we go. And we want to do 2 layers of it. So after it's dried, you want to put another little bit on that side, another little bit on the other, and then place it off in the corner to dry the rest of the way. Go ahead and take your new iPad screen, and in the approximate area that you're going to be putting your bracket, go ahead and put 2 big circles of primer as well, then follow up around the edge of the home button. This is going to ensure that our home button stays in place. And one of the things as well that you want to make sure that you do that a lot of people overlook is the long ribbon flex of this Touch ID does have a little bit of adhesive on it. We want it to stay in the spot where it should stay. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up this little backing and we're going to put a little bit of primer along the edge of that copper base of the digitizer. And it's dried up a little bit, so we're going to put a little bit more on our Q-tip. And here we go. Just be very careful not to get it on the inside of the digitizer. But that all looks really good. It's all in the right spot. And now is a great time to put our Touch ID back on the screen itself. What you can do, I always hold it just like this. And we want to line up our button first. So go ahead and put that into the screen. And we will want to lift up on this backing a little bit. This little protective cover. We want to lay this down along the edge. All right, that seems to be pretty straight. Now at this point, your home button should be in the right spot. We still need to put the bracket on though. Go ahead and check the front side and make sure that your home button, your Touch ID, is actually sticking through the glass an appropriate amount. Because if it's not, there's not really anything that you can do to make it stick through after you install the bracket if you don't check this now. What you can do is go ahead and push on the back side of your Touch ID and then feel on the front and make sure that it sits very flush. If it does have like a little bit of a sunken in bit, you may actually have a little bit of balled up adhesive underneath the rim of the Touch ID, or possibly you might have a splinter of glass from the old screen, which is pretty common. You want to make sure that you don't have any of that and that everything's still sitting super flush as it should. And so now with this in place, we're ready to put the bracket onto the actual home button. So what we'll do now is we've applied primer to the home button as well as we've applied primer to the screen itself. Using some Tessa tape, we're going to take a little bit of this and we are going to put it on the home button. And we're going to cut it just so it aligns up on the edge there. And you want to make sure that you're using primer. If you're not using primer at this point, then you're probably going to have your bracket falling off. And this is actually a little bit too thin for the actual bracket that we have. So we're going to add another little bit of adhesive on there. And so the next part that we want to do is we want to add a little bit of this Tessa tape on the edge. Which if you do have some that's big enough, you can go ahead and put it on the whole, bracket without using multiple pieces. But this will work just fine as long as you've used primer to ensure that it sticks well. So we're going to go ahead and cut that off to trim it to length. Now we're going to add another little edge on this side of the bracket. The main thing is you don't want to use a lot of little tiny strips. That will compromise the strength of it, but as long as you don't use more than 2 strips on there and that it covers the whole thing, you'll have enough strength with the home button itself using Tessa. So now we have on here, we have 2 different sizes of Tessa to complete the whole job, and this is optimal. You want to make sure that it doesn't hang over on the other side because we need to apply T7000 or like E8000 glue on the other side. I prefer T7000. That is what we've been using for a long time with some really great results, but I do hear that people have some really great results with the E8000 as well. So what we'll do is we want to go ahead and peel off the backing for this adhesive. The main thing is as you're applying your adhesive, you want to make sure that you don't touch the actual adhesive with your fingers. That will compromise the strength. So pulling these off, pretty simple process. I do recommend using tweezers because using your fingers, sometimes you can touch the adhesive and it could compromise the strength of it a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we now need to align this bracket so that it's directly over the button itself. If you look at the back side, there is going to be this little silver dot. The silver dot is going to be what's going to touch the actual actuator on the button itself. So with everything primed up, we are now ready to place this in there. Keeping in mind where the silver dot is, we are going to position our home button in that particular way, making sure that it's completely straight across and that it's up high enough so that the silver dot touches the back side of the home button. We're now ready to push this down and kind of work it back and forth, kind of massage it in. You want to basically expel any of the micro bubbles that may have gathered inside of the adhesive, and they won't be large. So they're not going to be like massive bubbles or like half of the adhesive, but they're going to be like some very, very slight bubbles. So as you push down, you're basically just massaging the adhesive into the glass. And as long as you've made it straight, then if you feel on the other side, your home button should click like it should. And it'll have an audible click, which that's exactly what you want. What you may notice though is if your home button does sit too low, you can actually fix that. If you notice that there's like a little bit more wobble or a little bit deeper feel than what you felt earlier whenever we tested it, you can actually fix that particular part. What you want to do is lay your glass down on a silicone mat so that it has a little bit of squish to it. You can't do this on a hard table or any kind of thin mat. It has to be kind of a thicker one like I have here. Getting a screwdriver like this, you can press on the back of the home button bracket to bend it in just very slightly. If you do this too much, you can actually actuate the button and cause it to think that the button is being pressed down all the time. So don't press too hard, but you do actually need to press pretty firmly. The key area to press is not directly in the middle. Pressing directly in the middle, just the geometry of how everything will bend, it's just going to spring back up and you're probably going to cause damage to the home button by pressing too hard directly in the middle. We actually want to press on the sides. So not too far over on the edge where you're going to be pressing on the upright where it bends upwards, but about 2 millimeters in from where the bend occurs. So we're going to take our screwdriver and we're just going to kind of push down a little bit. So kind of giving a press like every half second. So if I was doing this, it'd be like press, 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 press. A pretty firm press. You want to make sure that you don't slide off because if you do, you will jab your glass and break it. Go over to the other side and do the same thing. So press, 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 press. Pressing pretty decently hard, but not too hard where you'll cause irreversible damage. If you bend it too much now, it's going to be very difficult to bend that bracket back up to release the home button if you squish it too hard. So now if you feel on the other side of your glass, you'll probably feel that the home button is tightened up, that it's actually moved forward if you did have any kind of sunken feel to it, and this definitely works very good. If you have an iPad mini, those have slightly thinner brackets on them, and you will bend those a lot faster than the iPad Air brackets. So definitely be careful with those, and I've had in certain cases where I pushed too hard and locked the home button into just a fully depressed action. And so I've actually had to peel the bracket off, bend it back out. It's become a big mess. So definitely proceed with caution and use light presses but firm at the same time to bend the bracket in very slightly. And we're not finished with the button yet. We do want to add just a little bit more around the edges of the button. If you notice whenever you first took the button off, it had glue around the edges of the bracket. We want to simulate that with our own repair. The adhesive is going to hold it tight, but the glue around the edges is going to hold it secure over time. And those two types of adhesive together are going to be what's going to make a perfect iPad home button repair. So using a little bit of glue, I'm using T7000 here. Some other kinds are appropriate as well. you want to just put a tiny, tiny bead around the edges. And if you kind of bump the needle up against the edge of the bracket, it will allow it to make more of a bead and not glob up so much. So we put it on the edge there. Now we're going to go back on this other side and work right around the edge again. I do like to go slightly down the edge of the home button, hold that in, and then we want to work up around the top. And work slightly up the edge of the home button once again. We do need to peel, I can probably see in there actually, we'll do that there. Let's do this. We need to peel up this particular little flex. It's on the edge of the bracket. That way it'll allow us to get under the edge. Cool. And so now if we take a look at this particular repair, it's going to look very OEM, just with different types of adhesive. If you're using clear adhesive like E8000, it'll look pretty close to OEM because you have the actual tape adhesive underneath the bracket, then lining the edges you have the glue adhesive. So taking a look at this here, it looks like a perfect iPad repair. And we came down on the edges of the home button itself just ever so slightly. That's important because it's going to keep that home button from releasing or twisting, and it's going to make it stay up against the edge of the glass even better. But the main thing with all of this is to reduce the gap if your home button feels sunken, is to press on the back of it with a screwdriver. And don't press directly in the middle. Remember, press to the edges of the top of the bracket, about 2 millimeters in from where the bracket bends up to create the cavity for the home button to sit in. So now if you followed everything in this particular tutorial, you'll have a perfect home button that will not fall off as long as you use primer and all the other things, and it'll be a perfect iPad repair. Appreciate y'all watching this particular video, and I hope you can apply these particular tips to your new iPad repairs to ensure that the home button is going to feel OEM and not fall in after a while, because those are incredibly annoying if you have a sunken home button and you have to warranty it. So this will prevent you from having to warranty screens, and also just keep your customers even more satisfied and keep you improving your craft as an expert repair tech. I appreciate y'all watching, and like I mentioned earlier, everything in this workbench is linked up in the description below. So feel free to check all of that out. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And if you like this video, hit the like button. If not, the other button seems to work okay too. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. See y'all later.